panel flipped a little earlier. I've got pretty much all the seams fluxed that I'm aware of. I'm sure I'll find one or two that I've missed. I'm using, again, classic gel flux 50/50 solder. I'm working on the back side now, and I've got a choice soldering iron, a rheostat that's turned right now to number 5. 50/50 solder. This happens to be Eagle solder. Alright, so the next step, step number 1, was tacking all your pieces and flat soldering the front. Now I've flipped the panel over. Step number 2 is flat soldering the back. And this is where you're going to have all the air bubbles happen. You're going to have to take your time, go a little bit slower, and just work those air bubbles out. Those are the air bubbles that are seeping through from the seam as you cover it up. I've found also, make sure you can see where I am, that as I work down, I will avoid spots that don't have an escape for it. Yeah, hard to explain. If that air has nowhere to go, then it's going to bubble. But if you can push it out the end of a seam, it's going to bubble less. Now this seam is sealed on both sides, here and here, but it still has this area right here where the air can escape to, so it's probably not going to bubble as much as if that seam wasn't there. And again, I am just going really slow, letting those air bubbles escape. I don't want to spend too much time in one spot, because then the glass gets hot and that's when it's going to crack. Again, stay about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge so that we can get the zinc on. If there's any point that the solder doesn't stick to it, just add a little more flux or use your flux brush. I really haven't used a whole lot of flux on this, and there's plenty on the glass that I can just use it. I don't have to dip into the flux and pick up more on my brush. If there's a hole, just go back to it gently, just be patient, work all those out. And you want that solder to get down into the other side of the cracks. So you can see here, I hate to switch my setup right now, but I want to show you this. This is why we want to leave gaps in there. See the solder? You're going to have a lot stronger panel if that solder goes from the front to the seams, in through the seams, and onto the back, versus it just laying on top of the seam from the front. I'm sure people will disagree with me on that, but physics even will tell you that that is going to work best. I'm trying to get positioned here so you don't have that overhead glare. We're going to have it anyway, so let me just get you set back up here. I've got my tablet instead of my phone that I was using yesterday, and a couple clamps, and I'm kind of holding them in place with a roll of solder. I've used about 1/2 roll of solder on the front, just to give you a little idea there. So again, I'm just going to take my time. The back is where all your bubbles are going to happen. When I flip this back over to finish solder the front, it'll go a lot faster because those bubbles were taken care of here. If you go fast on the back and don't let those bubbles escape, you're going to fight it on the front. So just go ahead and take your time. And you can see I'm taking a swap or a drip of solder, and it goes quite a distance. Turn this up a little bit. I like going a little faster than I am. This is the soldering iron I was having a little bit of trouble with yesterday. It was the loose nut. It wasn't making contact with the head there, or the tip. See the bubbles escaping? I want all those bubbles to escape on the back so I don't fight them on the front. Usually where it's going to bubble up is a joint, a seam, where two pieces come together. That's where the air typically is going to bubble. So a lot of times I'll go back and just rest there for a second. Okay, there's a spot that didn't want to solder. There's plenty of flux on my panel yet and on my brush, so I just give it a quick brush over. If you have questions, ask questions. I can't see my tablet the way it's set up right here, but ask questions and or on the post, and I'll come back and answer them afterwards. Every once in a while you might want to wipe your tip off. And I'm just taking my time and letting those bubbles escape. That is going to be your best friend if you do that. If you try to rush it here on the back, those bubbles will be trapped, and when you go over to the front and you start soldering on the front, those bubbles are going to have to escape. That air's got to escape that seam, and so that's when you're going to have bubbles. And I'd rather have bubbles on the back than I would on the front. See how slow I'm going on this? This is probably the only time you'll see me going slow, because when I get to the front surface, I'm going to fly, just like if you watch my video with me breaking glass. I work fast. But this is where I want to get those bubbles out, and the only way I can do that is letting the solder do its thing. You can see as I advance down a line, I'm just touching my solder to the tip of the iron, feeding it that way. I don't have to take a drip and then tack solder it like I was before. I just keep on going. There's a spot that I missed fluxing. So I'm just going to borrow some flux from the rest of the glass on the neighbor pieces. Spread it around there. So if people ask you why stained glass costs so much, there's a lot of labor, there's a lot of time. Again, my goal is to keep my seams as flat as possible, because I can see this panel from the other side, or this panel will be viewed from the other side. Or if I ever decide that I'm going to sell it down the road, then it can be viewed just as nice on both sides. So not only am I thinking about it for today, but I'm thinking about it in 10 years. If I would sell it, somebody may want to display it as a room divider and want to see it on both sides. And it's easier to do it now than after I get the patina on and wax it and it's hung for a couple years, just to go ahead and make it look nice now. Plus it gives you practice on getting a good smooth solder. You might as well practice on the back. I can still hear a small rattle on this thing, so I may switch back over to my welder. So far this is working pretty good. Okay, so literally you can see what I'm going to be doing for the next probably hour, maybe just slightly longer than that. So to share the love, I'm going to go ahead and end this video because I'm doing nothing else new except what you've been watching. And I'm going to go over to Facebook and do some Facebook Live. doing the same exact thing as I'm doing here. Because some people would prefer the Facebook Live versus YouTube. All right. So I'll be back when I finish soldering.